Hi everybody, welcome back. Woody with you here again. We're going to go ahead and do the next few videos are going to be a series of videos on how to properly place a splint on a patient. We will do the top 8-10 splints in order, starting from the most easiest splint to the little bit more advanced splints using the following material. Basic stuff. We'll be using stockinette is not a requirement for splints, but it's nice to use, and I'll show you some tricks with the stockinette. Obviously, cotton padding, ace wraps, and we'll be using the Orthoglass type splinting material. Later on down the road, if it's mentioned in the comments or asked for, we'll go ahead and use plaster or something else to make splints. But for right now, we'll be using the Orthoglass material for these next few videos and demonstrations. So as I mentioned at the very beginning of the video, you do not need typically to use a stockinette when you're making a splint. However, there's some cool tricks you can do if you do decide to use a stockinette underneath the splint. What we're going to do is we're going to start with your basic cotton padding, cotton web roll. I'll be very, very honest. The textbook says, you turn sideways a little bit, thanks. Underneath a cast, you should put a minimum of 2 layers of cotton padding underneath a cast. So if you follow that textbook rule of doing 2 layers of padding under a cast, know that that is going to be at least your minimum when doing a splint. I tend to do 3 to 4 layers of padding under a splint. You don't know, you can't plan for when the patient's going to go from the urgent care or wherever they're being seen or the splint is being placed to the time they get to the orthopedic office. So I plan for worst case scenario. If you do a minimum of 2 to 3 layers, and if you choose to 3 to 4 layers, your patient's going to be very well padded, very well protected until they get to the orthopedic office, in which case they will remove the splint and replace it with whatever they feel necessary, whether that is a cast or a brace or something more advanced like an operation or procedure. This is the minimum amount of padding, and if you have a little left over, it would never hurt just to put a little extra. Always err on the side of a tad bit more extra than being a tad bit thin or shallow, and I guarantee you'll always err the proper direction. So that is the minimum amount of padding you would need under a splint. So in this particular case, like I mentioned earlier, we're using the Orthoglass material. When you've measured out the patient the proper length of Orthoglass fiberglass material, go ahead and cut that amount out of the roll. Remember to push back the end piece that's remaining in the roll, in the box. Make sure to clip it nice and tight so that you're trying to keep as much moisture and air out of there to try to salvage as much of your material as possible. You take your piece that you've measured and the proper size ace wrap, you come back towards the patient, and we're going to go ahead and apply this in a few minutes. Once we're going to talk about some of the things you have to do to apply it. I like to ensure the measurement is correct. The other thing I like to do is I like to open this just a little, and I like to cut away just like 1/8 of the edge and round the corners. This is going to be much more patient friendly so it doesn't dig on the patient as they're wearing the splint. Also, I'll kind of stretch out the end piece a little bit to kind of give a little bit of a border there. I'll do that on both ends. You can see here actually at this piece, if you look real close, I'll sit this so she can focus. The little thorns you see, when those things harden, those things are extremely sharp, and they can really do some damage to the skin if the splint's left on for more than a few days. Not to mention the fact they get snagged on clothes and stuff. So what I've done is I've rounded the edges. I've given it a little bit of a cuff on both end pieces, and you can see how it has a little bit of a cuff already built into it. We're going to wet this in just a moment, and we're going to use a standard 3-inch ace wrap to secure it. And when you wet it, the water should just be room temperature. And when you wet it, I have found that when you wet the material, you really only need a very minimal amount. That is more than enough water. Anything more than that, you're going to have to try to wring that water out, and it's going to take you a lot of time to do that. So what I do is I just kind of spread the water out nice and even. I'll come in close so you can see what I'm going to do here. You'll notice when the camera was aimed at me, I only wet one side of it. I'm going to actually place the dry side up against the cotton. And then what I do is I press out the excess water so that it doesn't soak through the cotton and create a maceration issue with the patient. This is the dry side. This will go up against the cotton that's on the arm already. This is the wet side. So, go ahead and bend your arm. Now earlier we mentioned that you don't need to put stockinette, but I have found that if you use stockinette, you can use the stockinette in your favor to help hold the splint in place, and that frees up both of your hands to work on the splint and do your molding and do your shaping. Right here, if they have a very, very meaty thumb, you are more than welcome to cut this part away and create like a little crescent shape, and that'll also be much more comfortable to the patient. I'll fold this over like you would in a cast, and I'll show you how that will also help hold the splint in place. And while it's starting to harden, it'll warm up. The patient will tell you that it's warming up, and you can start to shape it in the shape of a Volar Splint or a short arm splint or wrist splint that goes by 3 or 4 different names. So once we have this on there, it'll start to heat up. It'll start to take the shape, including the bend of the wrist there, the natural bend. You get your ace wrap. Remember, the ace wrap should never ever be tight. The ace wrap is only there to hold the splint in place. So you just lay it on comfortably. You do not have to torque on it. You just lay it comfortably the way it's naturally laying. Some people ask, do I cut a hole for the thumb? Do I do this? Do I do that? Do I cut a split? It's up to you if you want to cut it or if you just want to fold it. Any of those are not wrong. It's really your choice. There's the fold. Here's the cut. It's whatever you decide to do. You can also do the little hole in it and run it through. And then all you do is you just run the ace wrap down, nice and comfortable, overlapping halfway every time. And that is your Volar wrist splint. And I will show you just like so. And there you have it. Thank you for watching.